Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 306 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on what is window of tolerance. And it's Sunday the 19th of January 2024 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is absolutely brilliant. It's about a very life-changing concept that really helped me heal from my own trauma, and I definitely think that even though this mainly comes from counselling and psychology, I really think that this has such an important place in mainstream clinical psychology because it does help clients understand trauma, the way that trauma impacts us, and why they're having such different trauma responses. Well, compared to how they used to be before trauma. And even now, I think it's a really useful concept. I like egg explaining, I like egg exploring, and I really like thinking about it. And even if you're thinking, oh, I'm actually never going to work with traumatized people, chances are you actually are, because it's actually a lot more common than people think. And it's still very useful for psychoeducation purposes because you can use it to explain things like depression, anxiety, and those sort of other mental health conditions. So it definitely has a place within modern clinical psychology, and I flat out love it. So by the end of today's podcast episode, you're going to understand what is window of tolerance, why is it useful, and what are the different states outside of your window of tolerance, but also how do we widen our window of tolerance to help protect our own mental health. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is, we let those with most power keep it. Is it morally right that someone with a stronger negotiating position should get a better deal on a house, or a holiday, or a loan? Most people would have probably answered of course not, but a new study on a total of more than 3,000 people in the US suggests that in practice, we tend to believe the opposite. Across several vignettes describing negotiations between two participants with varying powers, Arthur Le Peugeot and Fiery Crushman saw that participants found it more acceptable for a person with more power to ask the other person to perform an unpleasant action, or to explicitly refuse to do said unpleasant action. The team argue that in the real world, this bias could help to create and perpetuate inequality. Okay, so that's definitely quite an interesting social psychology one because I don't think we can argue with it. I don't really think that it's that shocking that people with power don't like doing unpleasant tasks, but they can also abuse their power and make other people do unpleasant tasks. So I don't think that this is shocking. And to be honest, I think that the whole power structure definitely creates and it definitely perpetuates inequality because it creates inequality in the first place because the people who, with the most power, they tend to make other people do unpleasant tasks. But then on the flip side, the people who don't have the power don't actually stand up and they don't challenge the power structure. So I think it's quite interesting. I think it's definitely a comment on modern society and just how normalized power inequalities are. And I think that's something that we also need to challenge and actually fix ourselves. But as I was talking to a psychology lecturer yesterday, the main problem in society isn't so much individuals, but it's societal and it's structural. Well, structural though, because these power hierarchies and these power issues are so baked into our culture and our society that we actually need to restructure and to reform a whole bunch of the different bits and pieces of our society just to try and get rid of this power inequality. So the next one is blindside color perception opens up new questions about vision. For you to read these words, signals from your eyes must pass through a region of your brain called the primary visual cortex, also known as V1. Without V1, you'll be chronically blind and you'll see nothing. But as classic research from the 1970s showed, some people with severe damage to V1 who have no awareness of seeing anything at all can remarkably still respond to some visual stimuli. They might do better than a child at identifying whether a ball is appearing on the left or right, for example, whilst denying that they can see the ball. This ability is known as blindside. A recent paper from cerebral cortex describes the case of a man who has it, but the exact nature of what TN can see and the fact that he apparently perceives a colour in a particular challenges traditional concepts of a blind side. Taken together, this is a case to suggest that we have more to learn about how people with healthy brains see the world. So I think there are a few bits and pieces that I want to say about this article. First of all, I really do like this sort of research which looks at something that challenges the status quo, especially what we believe about how something works in its hypotheses, is that they're falsifiable. Well, that's what a good hypothesis is, and that's what a good research question is. But the interesting thing about this is that if we say, right, healthy people see this because signals from the eyes pass through the one. Okay, then, so if that's the status quo, and then if we find one person or one thing that proves that wrong, then chances are that is wrong. Full stop. So equally, I do just want to say that the issue with case studies is that case studies are great for highlighting particular cases, but I'm always a bit concerned about generalizing them. So I think that yes, I think that this is very interesting finding, but I don't know 100%. I'm not 100% sure we can generalize this to either everyone with blind sight or if we need to completely readapt our approach to blindside, or if this completely challenges what healthy people see there. I think we need more research, a bit more evidence than a single person. Personally, because my point always comes back to how representative is one person against 7 or 8 billion people all over the world. I'm not 100% sure it is. So I think it's very interesting finding. I just think we need to be a little careful about how we generalize it. Yet we do need more research. So the last one is mansplaining is not just for men. One of the most striking recent public examples of mansplaining is the idea of a professional goater, Georgia Bull, having her own swing criticised by a male amateur at a driving range. Many women will be familiar with perceiving this kind of unsolicited, prescripted, this is what you're doing wrong and this is how you should do it type of advice from men, and often men who are not qualified to judge. According to new research in psychological science, however, mansplaining and its negative emotional fallout might not be male only dominated. Such critiques from other women can affect how women feel about themselves. Similarly, according to this study, not as badly though as when they come from men. So there's not a great amount that I can actually say about that psychology news article because mansplaining, I think it's wrong. It definitely should not happen though. Plus, I'm also not 100% familiar with it, but with this area of psychological research. So, and I have just seen something else that I want to comment on. But I think personally. I think if someone's doing something wrong though, and if you are actually qualified to help them, then yes, help them, but be kind about it for starters. Don't put it negative. Well, don't put it like negatively. For example, on a Friday, I was teaching a like research module. Well, I had to do it prior to school, and some other students did technically say incorrect answers, but I didn't say no, you're wrong. No, that's silly. No, we just don't say that. We'll say that in like I said what I said, I think along the lines of, oh, that's a really good starting point, or that's a really good idea. But what about this and this stuff? So it's sort of that constructive criticism, which is where you're being kind, but you are acknowledging that there is still one or two things that they could improve. So I would just say that just be careful, and I would say don't mansplain, don't, and that sort of stuff. So the other thing that I wanted to comment on was it was a massive shame that Maguire's dead because she was an amazing researcher who was famous for the London taxi study, an experiment central to the evolution of spatial memory research. And Elena Maguire is sadly passed away earlier this month. And it's a shame that she's gone because she had such an interesting research study because her study actually got me interested in neuroplasticity, and she really did transform the field of spatial memory. So, great woman, lots of great research, and it's a shame that she's gone. So, my thoughts and feelings are with her friends and family. So, that's enough the psychology news section. So, let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week has been the first week back of the university year, and this new clinical psychology module I'm doing, I flat out love. It is amazing though, because it's all about the core competencies, and it basically takes you through the different stages about what happens when you first meet your client, as you actually get the referral letter, and then you meet the client all the way up through assessment, the intervention, the treatment, and discharging the client themselves. So it's really good, and it's definitely a lot more practical. There's a lot more role playing, so I really do enjoy it, and it's just a lot of fun, though. So because this week was the sort of questions that you ask her when you first like meet a client, and those sort of things. So basically there's first client interactions, which I always think are quite fascinating. And it was really great to be able to role play it and just have some fun in a 2 hour lecture. Also, I'm starting to write up my last study on mental health. Yes, so like, that finished the 10th of December. So now I'm just analysing it, writing it up, but so I've done the method section, I've done the data analysis, I've actually got some correlations which I'm quite amazed with that are statistically significant. So I'm very happy about that. So today I want to write the qualitative and the quantitative research section, which should not be hard. And then next week, I'm hoping to do the introduction, discussion, conclusion, and abstract. And then that should be everything done for that paper though. And oh yes, and then I also need to gear up for my last study on microaggressions, which I'm actually quite excited about because me and my supervisor in this last mental health study, we actually played around with the method itself, and because we've actually got some statistically significant correlations, it should actually work out quite well. Only problem is that this next study is going to be a lot of moving parts and it's going to be a bit chaotic because I'm actually going to have to interact with participants in terms of I'm going to have to set up this app on their phones, which is not going to be fun whatsoever. Ever though. But it should be an interesting study for sure. In other news, I'm still doing a lot of like outreach stuff, especially when it comes to reading support, and I'm also teaching a research module. So what that in those is that it's very much a case of like a year 12 students. So for our international audience, that's about 16 and 17 year olds. So they come in to us, and we basically teach them how to do a like a small research project to an area that they really like. So there's only two students at the moment because the teacher who was organising it didn't actually tell their students. So we've got one on AI, another one on conformity in specific circumstances, and then the AI one is focusing on. I forget how we finalised her question in the end, but it was basically AI in the classroom and how it's getting students to use their brains less. Of course, that was her word, and we needed to help her with it, but it was a really good start. So that is actually going to be, yeah, a lot of fun. And the person who I'm co-delivering with is really nice, and I really get on with her. So that's extra great. As always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me at connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave comments out shout out at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, or you can always tweet on Twitter at sci or leave a comment on the LinkedIn post, Facebook post, or Blue Sky post, because I'm now on a Blue Sky, and I'm actually quite liking it. It's a lot better than a Twitter, so much better than Twitter. And also, feel free to send pictures of where you're listening from all over the world. I always love to see where you're listening from. And I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. So today's podcast episode has been sponsored by biological psychology, because the interesting thing about window of tolerance is that it's very biological based. It's very much based on our nervous system. So if you want to understand more about the nervous system, this great, really easy to understand book really does help you to understand it more at a deeper level. Because by the end of this biological psychology book, you'll be able to understand how does evolution, how does the nervous system, how does our brain, hormones, neurotransmitters, pheromones, evolution, and so many more great areas, how does it all impact our behavior? And how does it make us perform certain actions, but also why does it make us not perform other actions over? So I love this book. It's really useful. I think the cover is beautiful, and I really do recommend that you pick up the paperback or the hardback, just so you've got a really beautiful book on your bookshelf. So I really do recommend it. So that is biological psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and the hardback version from Amazon, local books, or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, now you can at selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes& Noble, and selected library systems like Biblioteca, Overdrive, and Baker& Taylor. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. Now, I'm actually just going to say this for the podcast, just so I actually do it. This week, I'm actually going to commit to Patreon a lot more, in terms of I've got a whole bunch of blog posts which I have written, like they're all blogger posts though, which means that I've written them, I've edited them and everything. I've just not released them into podcast episodes yet. And yep. So I'm actually going to upload them onto Patreon this week at some point, just so there's a lot of content which you can only get if you become a patron of the show. So I just wanted to mention that though, because the Patreon I really do want to double down on just so it's worth it for all of you, and just you back and get like exclusive rewards, exclusive inner size, and just that content that you don't normally get at the moment. At the moment, though, because I've been dealing with a lot of other stuff, though. But Patreon, I am going to focus on this week, in addition to everything else that I plan to do. So, if you want to get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the psychology podcast. And if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Conor Wiley. So that's time for personal update as you move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what is window of tolerance. This is a great podcast episode. I've really enjoyed it, so I know you're going to love it too. So let's dive into it. What is the window of tolerance? This is a topic that has been critical in my vape counselling, and once I understood this psychological concept, things started to get a little easier. You and your client understanding the window of their tolerance isn't a magic bullet that will suddenly make everything better, but it can be immensely useful in the healing from a trauma, including sexual violence. Therefore, window of tolerance was a term coined by Daniel Seger, who was a clinical professor at UCLA School of Medicine. He created window of tolerance to describe the optimal emotional zone that people can best exist in so they can thrive and function in their everyday lives. When someone is within their window of tolerance, then they have a sense of groundedness, openness, curiosity, flexibility, presence, an ability to emotionally self-regulate, and a capacity to tolerate any stresses that pop up in their everyday life. However, either side of the window of tolerance are two different states where we do not function and thrive in our everyday life. These are called the hyperarousal and the hypoarousal states. When someone is in hyperarousal, then they are in an emotional state that can be characterized as panic, anger, high energy, anxiety, irritability, overwhelm, chaos, hypervigilance, startled responses, and fight or flight instincts. For example, I know I'm in hyperarousal state during my panic attacks, anxiety, my thoughts running a million miles an hour about how unsafe I am and how I need to escape, or how I'm going to die or get raped again. On the other end of the spectrum is the hyperarousal state, where someone effectively shuts down and experiences numbness, withdrawal, depressiveness, flat affect, disconnection, shame, amongst others. For instance, when I'm in a hyperarousal state, like an hour before I started writing this post, I was severely depressed, shut down, and I didn't want to move. I effectively wanted to play dead, so I couldn't be hurt again, like the night he did that to me. Why is window of tolerance important? So, if we're outside our window of tolerance, then we cannot function and thrive in our everyday lives. For example, when my mental health died in August and September, and probably October 2024 because of my rape, most of the time I was too hypervigilant, too anxious, and terrified to function on most days. I was always in a state of hyperarousal, or I was too depressed and shut down to function. Hypoarousal. Therefore, when we're in our window of tolerance, we can access all the prefrontal cortex as well as executive functioning skills that we need to be able to thrive, like our ability to organize, plan, and prioritize complex tasks that we need to complete. Also, being within our window of tolerance means that we can emotionally self-regulate, start projects and actions, and focus on them, and practice good time management too. These executive functions are critical to our functioning because they allow us to work, problem solve whatever issues and challenges we face, and they allow us to be present and work in our relationships. This is a major problem that I had during my mental health crisis. I was too anxious, terrified, and distressed to do much work, problem solve, and I wasn't able to have or maintain many social relationships. I wasn't able to do much outreach work at my university because a lot of it was brand new students and staff that I just hadn't worked with before, and the specific type of outreach activities was the school holidays was so different to what I was used to. I just couldn't deal with it. Then it was even worse for my own business. I couldn't write much, I couldn't do a fraction of the business tasks that I needed to do, and I could see the impact it has on my bottom line and at the podcast audience. This is why being within our window of tolerance is so important. Moreover, we lose access to these skills when we're outside our window of tolerance because we lose access to the prefrontal cortex and our executive skills. Since instead of relying on our brain areas, we default to panic, action, or a freeze response. Sometimes this can manifest as self-sabotaging behaviors, so we might gravitate towards choices and patterns that undermine or erode our relationships with ourselves, others, and the world. Ultimately, it's important that we try to stay within our window of tolerance so that we can support ourselves, function, and live in a healthier way. Yet, there will be times in our lives when we fall outside our window of tolerance and we end up in non ideal, emotionally regulated ways. Thankfully, this is just part of human behavior and it's natural and normal. Therefore, the ultimate goal of this podcast episode isn't to make sure that we never fall outside of our window of tolerance. That is never going to happen. But instead, I want to show you why it's important to expand our window of tolerance. This allows a person to effectively bounce back quicker and to become more resilient over time, so that we can do better with being outside our window of tolerance. In my opinion, this is a critical area of mental health and trauma work because as our window of tolerance expands, I have been able to deal with more and more. For example, I used to probably have thousands of triggers, and that's probably not a joke. But everything has been toned down recently in terms of my PTSD. Like a few months ago, even if I sort of referenced to sex in a film or book, my mental health completely died, and I would have major intrusive thoughts and flashbacks. Now I can tolerate sex references and even the odd light sex scene in a film or book, and I only experience mild intrusive thoughts and flashbacks. It's still a little distressing, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was a few months ago. How do you increase your window of tolerance? Whilst there are several effective therapeutic techniques and activities that can over time increase your window of tolerance, everyone's window of tolerance is rather different with a range of biopsychosocial factors. For example, whether or not you had childhood trauma and social support can impact the size of your window of tolerance, as well as your physiology, personal history, and your temperament. Although these factors can interact with each other to make your window of tolerance, and no two window of tolerances will ever be the same. As a result, it's important to mention that people like me who come from trauma backgrounds will have a smaller window of tolerance than people who have not experienced trauma. The shrinking of the window of tolerance isn't unique to any sort of trauma, like physical, sexual, or childhood trauma. Your window of tolerance doesn't discriminate. Trauma is a trauma, and it is the unfortunate gift that keeps on giving. The reason why trauma shrinks your window of tolerance is because trauma gives you triggers that are more likely to rapidly and more frequently push you outside your window of tolerance and into hypo or hyperarousal. Consequently, it's important that as a part of trauma work, even though anyone that can actually benefit from this knowledge, is that we work to expand a client's window of their tolerance. This allows the client to practice resilience and brings them back down into their window of their tolerance when you're in a hypo or hyperarousal state. The only reasonable difference in this regard between people with and without trauma is that a person with relational trauma might need to work harder, longer, and dedicate more time and effort into expanding their window of tolerance. Personally, I can relate to this because it's normal for a person's window of tolerance to expand as they get older, experience more things and the stresses, and that they learn more techniques without realizing it about how to bring themselves back into their window of tolerance. However, ever since I was raped, and up until 7 months later, when I learned how to feel safe in my own body, I just couldn't bring myself back into my window of tolerance, and it required a lot of therapeutic work, a lot of effort, and a lot longer than I wanted to be able to bring myself reliably back into my window of tolerance. Of course, there are still times that I can't achieve this, but thankfully, 90% of the time I can. In addition, the two main ways how someone can recognize that the window of their tolerances are unique and how to expand it. Ultimately, we need to understand the foundational biopsychosocial elements that contribute to a healthy nervous system, and that's why I flat out love Healing a Sexual Trauma Workbook by Erica Schuschon. Just look at the blog post, please. I cannot pronounce that last name. Mm, because it handles this topic very well. Also, we can give ourselves this knowledge by providing our minds with supportive experiences. This can include providing ourselves with a good amount of stimulation, focus, and engagement, whilst we balance this with a good amount of play, rest, and spaciousness. This was a mistake I made this week at the time of revising because I overbooked myself with outreach work at my university. So I had plenty of stimulation and focus, and I was really engaged with helping students change their lives, but I didn't give myself enough rest time. Hence, I found myself very outside my window of tolerance on two occasions this week. Moreover, we need to provide our bodies with supportive self-care. For example, we need to get enough sleep, exercise, eat nutritious food, attend to our medical needs, and avoid substances that damage our health. Since if our bodies aren't looked after, then our nervous system won't be healthy, and it will be easier to go outside our window of our tolerance. As well as we need to provide ourselves with these supportive experiences, like being in a connected relationship and being connected to something bigger than ourselves. Now, I know this sounds like religion, and I suppose if people find that useful, then go for it, I guess. But you can be connected to other things greater than yourself. For example, I connect to my outreach work at my university because I'm helping to inspire and show young people that it doesn't matter what background or area they come from, if they want to, they can go to university and thrive. As well as I connect my books and my podcast because I'm providing people with psychology education, entertainment, and hopefully I'll inspire some of you to enjoy mental health and clinical psychology as much as I do. You can connect to anything that you're passionate about. Finally, for this first part, you can attend to your physical inner environment to set yourself up for success. You can do this by working and living in places and ways that reduce your stresses in increasing them, as well as you can design an external inner environment that nourishes you instead of depletes you. I did this when I moved into my shared house with my best friend back in June because as one of our housemates wasn't moving in for another 3 months, I made their room into my office with their permission. I just want to stress that. And that was great for me. It gave me a stress free, non triggering environment for me to do what I loved. Secondly, we need to work with ourselves, cultivate, and use a wide range of tools to bring ourselves back inside our window of tolerance when we inevitably find ourselves outside. You can do this by developing tools, habits, practices, and internalized and externalized resources that can help you to boost your self-soothing, self-regulation, and ground yourself. And I'm smiling as I write this because of these aspects of the winter of tolerance that I've been reading and about in that healing and sexual trauma workbook, and it's very helpful to learn about. Maybe I'll dive into these aspects of the winter of tolerance in a future podcast episode. Conclusion. I cannot stress enough the importance of the winter of tolerance in trauma work because it actually did change my life. There are lots of concepts in clinical psychology that are useful to some clients, but not all. And there are certainly concepts that are useful to the vast majority of clients. Window of tolerance is certainly one of the latter because it's a very useful tool for psychoeducation and explaining to our clients why their body is reacting in the way that it is. It was the belief to understand why my body was doing all of these extreme trauma responses, and it was nice to put a name to the psychological framework. Therefore, it meant now I understood what I was dealing with, I could research, read, and practice how to expand my window of tolerance and how to reduce the volatility of my nervous system. If I didn't know about the window of tolerance, I certainly wouldn't be as far along in my recovery as I am now. Ultimately, the window of tolerance might only be a psychoeducational concept, but it's a powerful tool to use in clinical trauma work. Therefore, I unofficially suggest to my fellow aspiring and qualified psychologists that you embody this window of tolerance in your own life, and especially in your clinical trauma work. Your clients and yourself will openly find it more useful and life-changing than you ever thought possible. I know I did, and that's one of the entire points of this profession. Clinical psychology is all about changing one life for the better at a time. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did because, as I kept saying in that podcast episode, window of tolerance was such a life-changing idea for me, and it really did help my recovery more than I would ever possibly think, though. So it's brilliant. I really do recommend it, and I definitely know that in my future clinical work, I will definitely be using that psychoeducational concept because it's so valuable. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when your wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to support the podcast on on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to learn more, then please check out Biological Psychology, available in all the usual places. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.